5 Americans are now back on home soil after being freed from an Iranian prison. This was the scene in Virginia this morning as they returned home. It's part of a complex prisoner swap that involved unfreezing $6 billion of Iran's oil assets. The swap is proving controversial for U.S. President Joe Biden, whose critics argue the swap was effectively a ransom payment. 5 Iranians were released, jailed mainly on charges of violating U.S. sanctions. 3 of them will not return to Iran. The CBC's Sam Sampson is in Washington, and she has the very latest on this story.
The plane arrived just south of D.C. early this morning at a military base in Virginia. And you can see a deep breath there from Siamak Namazi, who was detained in Iran since 2015. Now, family members were there with small American flags, waving them wildly, lots of hugging. And it's such a relief for these families. Now that they're here, those 5 Americans will get medically checked out and then help to get used to free life in the United States again. As I mentioned, this is a huge relief for the family members and friends here in the United States. Here's what Namazi's uncle had to say on CNN.
Well, we are a big family, and the whole family went through such a lot of ups and downs. Knowing what he's going through in prison, 8 years, subject to torture in the first 2 years, and then to finally see him come down the plane, it was, no words can describe it, because really the whole family's been through hell and praying for this moment, and finally it's arrived, and they're also jubilant that the moment has come.
This moment was the result of months of negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. For the 5 Americans, the United States released 5 Iranian nationals who were here on federal charges, mostly against sanctions. One of whom, by the way, according to the New York Times, is an Iranian Canadian. Now, the United States also released $6 billion of Iran's oil revenue. That money was frozen in South Korea because Trump's administration backed out of an international nuclear deal and placed sanctions on Iran. Now that $6 billion is out in a Qatari bank, according to officials. The White House claims it can closely monitor that money, which it says can only be used for humanitarian costs like food and medicine.
First off, this is a good deal. We essentially took Iranian money from a restricted account in South Korea and put it in a much more restricted account in banks in Qatar, where it's going to be monitored by the Department of Treasury, and it's only going to be used to buy humanitarian items like food, medicine, COVID vaccines, baby formula, things like that. Essentially what we've done is we've taken one bank account, put it into a more restricted one, and told them that we're going to monitor in a very restricted manner what they use it on.
In terms of international relations between the two countries, this swap is not expected to make much of a difference. They are very much at odds, the United States and Iran. Now, for a few reasons. First being Iran's nuclear program. U.S. President Joe Biden actually mentioned it during his United Nations General Assembly speech that Iran must never acquire nuclear weapons. And just today, on Tuesday, the U.S. imposed more sanctions to stop the flow of Iranian drones between countries such as Russia. Now, on top of that, the United States also takes issue with the humanitarian aspect going on in Iran, how that country treats its women and girls. So while this prisoner swap is great for families and friends of those 5 Americans who are now free, overall, things are very much still tense between the United States and Iran. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Washington.